The summer of 1987 brought with it a heat that seemed to bake, the very soul out of West Texas, the kind of heat that made mirages dance on. Highway 87 and turned the red dirt into powder fine enough to choke on. It was in this unforgiving landscape that Jake Martinez found himself driving his dusty Ford pickup toward the Henderson Ranch, a sprawling piece of prairie land that had been in the Henderson family since before the Civil War. He'd heard stories about the place, whispers really, about the woman who now ran it alone, Margaret Henderson. They called her the Giant Widow, though never to her face, and the name carried both respect and a touch of small-town cruelty. Jake was 46 years old, weathered by sun and circumstance, a third-generation rancher whose own spread had been slowly eaten away by drought and debt. He needed land to lease, and the Henderson property had 5,000 acres of prime grazing pasture that had sat empty for 2 years. Empty since Tom Henderson had died suddenly of a heart attack while mending a fence on the eastern boundary. The whole county had turned out for that funeral, Jake remembered. Tom Henderson had been well-liked, a quiet man with a fair handshake and an honest word. As the truck rattled up the long gravel drive, Jake could see the main house in the distance. It was a sprawling ranch-style home built in the 50s, with a wide front porch and white columns that had gone grey with age and neglect. The outbuildings looked solid enough, but there was an air of abandonment about the place, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. Margaret Henderson emerged from the house before Jake had fully parked. She moved with an athlete's grace, and he understood immediately why folks talked. She had to be 6'3" at least, maybe more, with broad shoulders and long legs encased in faded wranglers. Her hair, once blonde, he guessed, was now streaked with silver and pulled back in a practical ponytail. But it was her face that caught him, a handsome face with high cheekbones and eyes the color of Texas bluebonnets. Eyes that had seen too much sorrow too soon. "You Martinez," she called out as he stepped from the truck. "Yes, ma'am." "Jake Martinez. Appreciate you seeing me." He extended his hand, noting that she didn't have to reach up to shake it like most women did. Her grip was firm, businesslike, the hand of someone who'd worked cattle and mended fences herself. "Come on in. Too hot to stand out here jawing." She turned and headed back toward the house, and Jake followed, noticing the slight limp in her left leg. Basketball injury, he'd heard, back when she'd been Margaret Sullivan. Star Center for the Midland High Bulldogs. Scholarship offers from 3 different colleges. The inside of the house was cooler, darkened against the afternoon sun. The furniture was old but well-maintained, the kind of solid oak pieces that lasted generations. Photographs lined the walls and covered nearly every flat surface. Margaret in a basketball uniform, number 23, frozen mid-jump shot. Margaret and Tom on their wedding day, both impossibly young, her in a simple white dress, him in an ill-fitting suit with a bolo tie. Margaret pregnant, Tom's hand on her swollen belly. A baby, then a toddler, then a young man in a military uniform. "Coffee or sweet tea?" Margaret asked from the kitchen doorway. "Tea would be fine, thank you," she returned with 2 tall glasses, condensation already beading on the sides, and settled into a worn leather recliner that had clearly been Tom's chair. Jake took the couch, setting his hat on the cushion beside him. "I'll be straight with you," Margaret began, her voice low and measured. "I've had 4 other ranchers come by in the past 6 months wanting to lease the north pasture. Sent them all packing. The Mitchells wanted to run goats, which would tear up the grassland. The Parsons boy didn't have 2 nickels to rub together and thought I'd carry him on credit. The others, well, they spent more time looking at me like I was some kind of curiosity than they did talking business." Jake nodded slowly. "I can understand that, ma'am. Small towns have long memories and longer tongues." Something flickered in her eyes, appreciation maybe. "So tell me why I should lease to you." For the next hour, they talked cattle and grass rotation, water rights and fencing responsibilities. Jake laid out his situation honestly. He'd lost half his land 3 years back, kept what he could, but needed more pasture to make his operation viable. He had 200 head of mixed-breed cattle, mostly Herefords, with some Angus mixed in. Good animals, well-maintained. He could pay fair market rate for the lease, had references from the bank and 3 other ranchers he'd done business with. Margaret listened without interrupting, those blue eyes studying him carefully. When he finished, she stood and walked to the window, looking out over the land that rolled away toward the horizon. "Tom and I bought our first cattle together the year we got married," she said quietly. "I was 18, he was 20. We didn't know a damn thing, truth be told. Lost our shirts the first year, but we learned. Built this place up from nothing into something real, something that mattered." She turned back to face him. "We were going to pass it on to our son, Michael. He died in Iraq in 2003, roadside bomb outside Fallujah." "I'm sorry," Jake said, and meant it. "Then Tom went 2 years ago. Heart just stopped. Doctor said it was quick, that he didn't suffer. I'm not sure that's supposed to make me feel better, but there it is." She returned to her chair, and for a moment she looked every one of her 64 years. "So now it's just me and 5,000 acres I can't work alone and won't sell. Because this land is all I have left of them. You understand?" Jake nodded. "I do. My father built our place from scratch. Came up from Mexico with nothing but determination and a strong back. Every acre, every fence post, it means something. It's more than just land." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the clock on the mantel ticking steadily. Finally, Margaret spoke. "You can have the lease. 6-month trial period, then we'll talk about extending it. I'll draw up the papers with my lawyer, and we can sign next week." "That's more than fair. I appreciate the opportunity, Mrs. Henderson." "It's Margaret," she said. "If you're going to be working this land, we might as well be on a first-name basis." Jake, then. That was how it started. A simple business arrangement between 2 people who understood what land meant, what legacy meant. Jake moved his cattle onto the north pasture the following week, and true to his word, he maintained the fences, rotated the herds properly, and made sure the stock tanks stayed full. But he also found himself stopping by the main house more often than strictly necessary. At first, it was to discuss ranch business, a broken water line, a section of fence that needed replacing, whether to overseed the pasture come fall. But gradually, the conversations expanded. Margaret would brew a pot of coffee or mix up a pitcher of sweet tea, and they'd sit on the front porch in the evening when the heat had broken. She told him about her basketball days, how she'd been the first girl in the county to dunk a basketball in a game, how the scholarship offers had come in and then vanished when she'd gotten pregnant senior year. She spoke about Tom without excessive emotion, just matter-of-fact remembrances of a life shared. He'd been a good man, she said, steady and true. He'd never made her feel like she'd given up anything to be his wife, to raise their son, to build the ranch together. Jake told her about his own life. Growing up as the youngest of 6 children, learning English and ranching at the same time, watching his father work himself into an early grave to prove that a Mexican immigrant could make it in Texas. He spoke about his brief marriage in his 20s, how it had ended amicably when they both realized they wanted different things from life. She'd moved to Houston, remarried, had 3 kids. He'd stayed on the ranch, alone but not lonely, content with his cattle and his land. As summer faded into fall, something shifted between them. It was nothing dramatic, no sudden declaration or grand gesture. It was in the way Margaret's face would light up when his truck came down the drive. It was in how Jake found himself thinking about her during the day, remembering something she'd said or the way she laughed, a deep, genuine sound that seemed to surprise her every time. It was in the comfortable silences that stretched between them, the kind of quiet that only comes when 2 people are genuinely at ease with one another. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Margaret grew quiet. She held her glass of tea but didn't drink, just stared out at the horizon. Jake waited, having learned that she would speak when she was ready. "I've been thinking about something," she finally said. her voice barely above a whisper. "Something that probably sounds foolish for a woman my age. Nothing you could say would sound foolish to me." She turned to look at him then, and he saw vulnerability in those blue eyes, a rawness that made his chest ache. "I've never been kissed," she said, so quietly he almost didn't hear, "by anyone but him." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Jake understood what she was saying, what she wasn't saying. 42 years with one man, high school sweethearts who'd grown old together, and now she was adrift in a world she'd never expected to navigate alone.